Reflection 2, we're going to be looking at articles and videos within the weeks, week 4, week 5, week 6. For me, I'm going to be looking at really specifically the ideas presented in the Heal documentary by drawing in articles from Halprin, Goldsby, Ambrushed, and Bacon. I'm also going to be pulling in the ideas and definitions from Jungian psychology as well, kind of looking at bringing the unconscious conscious. So really to begin, the Heal documentary at first was very triggering for me just because of my connection to cancer as a disease and seeing it take my grandmother and all of the components that went along with that. The main idea within the Heal documentary was power of positive energy and positive thinking can result in curing illness and curing the disease that you have. And there's been readings like this before that I found. I think it was Working with the Dreaming Body was another one that really honed in on this idea that, all right, if I can just reframe and heal all this trauma and things that is built up throughout my life, that I can cure this disease that I have. And I think it was a couple things within this that I found really interesting, I guess is the word I'll use. But one, the person that's making this documentary is worth $8 million, I think, and she's coming in and trying to sell the idea that we need to draw from different alternative medicine, which I think is a really great concept in theory, but also the affordability. They do touch on this a little bit in the documentary itself, talking about, okay, what would you do if insurance covered this? Would you lean more into alternative medicine? And the person in the film that's featured, she said, yes, I would really like to pull in, to lean more that way, but it's just the drugs themselves are so much easier to get our hands on. And I thought that was a really powerful concept. But then within the documentary, there wasn't a whole lot of, they did talk about the placebo effect and how, okay, if you believe something, it would transmit into something. And I think for me, when I first started hearing these ideas, especially when it was really close to the time when my grandma passed away from cancer, I shut down immediately. And I was like, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to listen to this. This is completely off base. When someone has cancer and it's stage 4, that's it, And now I think I've reached a point where I'm a little more curious. I'm curious on, okay, what if there is a little bit of science to this? Maybe not science is the word, but more facts than we realize, because there's been clear cases where this has worked for some people. But then again, even in the person in the film, it sounded like she was kind of going along with cancer treatment, but also having the spiritual aspect as well. And for her, collectively, that worked as a healing tool for her to beat the cancer, essentially. And then one of the speakers in the film was talking about how he was saying that what happens is there's this narrative that gets put on someone that's sick, and they do not want to they struggle because everybody's saying, you're really sick, you're not going to get better, yada yada, stage 4 is really unbeatable, you have 6 months to live. Here's all this narrative that's being told to this person, and they have to overcome this and start thinking, I can beat it and I will beat it. And they almost have to thank the healing for happening that hasn't already happened, is where this idea came from. And I think that's a really interesting concept, because I was thinking about my grandma and how for her that was immediately the label. They said 6 months, that's it. She really did trust her doctor, and she really was leaning into his guidance on how she was doing. She also had a lot of people praying for her, and that was another thing that was talked about, how we're collectively intertwined because of all of our energy. And if we have a lot of people putting out positivity for us, then positive change can happen. So I thought that was, she did have that circle. She had a lot of people at her church praying for her. She did have the belief that she was fine and she was going to get better. So it's kind of, I'm stuck a little bit with this concept. Like, part of me wants to buy into it, and part of me is still feels a little bit hesitant because of what I experienced from the disease. So as someone witnessing it from the outside. So I'm a little bit more adaptive and curious, more so than when I first experienced the loss of my grandma and what the disease did to her. But I also wouldn't shy away from the idea that I think that if you have a really sick child who is at the point of, about to pass away, I wouldn't shy away from all treatment. I mean, I think it has to be what works for the person. And then also the affordability factor. I mean, I think another part that was really triggering for me was this. One of the doctors said, it's, diabetes isn't genetic, and it's something that, you can beat. I have a friend that's on insulin, and has to take that regularly. And I mean, maybe there's a way where it's not biological and she can fight her way out of it. So I'm taking all this with kind of a grain of salt. But that being said, I'd like to kind of move into applying the readings with some of the different things that are talked about. The first one was kind of looking at movement, metaphor, and meaning, and how all of that together can kind of foster a layer of emotional vulnerability and bring up different things that need to be healed, and kind of resolve some stress that's carried within. So this one is called, the reading I'm drawing from is The Movement as Metaphor by Halprin. So, I mean, it just talks about how, I like this quote here. It says, just as the physical body gives us literal and concrete structure that expresses who we are, so every part and function of the body can also be understood as metaphors for expression of our being. We feel and observe our life experiences through our bodies. And this one really made me think about somatic work and how but not only that, but the concept of imagination, after viewing the class session, and how it's almost like through movement, it can be a tool of imagination and unpacking these different, different items within us that need to be healed. I remember hearing, I don't know, it was a guest speaker in one of my classes where it was talking about how through somatic work and somatic healing, someone who was stuck like this to the side, and she was a victim of rape and sexual assault and things like that, she, through somatic work and really unpacking this and unpacking the emotional suffering that the person felt, she was able to release, and then release what was causing her to be stuck in that physical position. So there's so much power in that. I think, in the reading it says there's a relationship and interplay between the physical body, emotions, and thinking. And it talks about body sensation, postures, and gestures reflect our history and our current ways of being. So I think that's something that's really powerful. And, as a future therapist and counselor, working with clients through an element of movement, I was leery of it at first, because for myself there's a little bit of, I did choir growing up, and I had to do dances and things like that. And it really was everybody was like, Amanda's such an awkward dancer. She's not a good dancer. And there was this very strong narrative that was placed upon me where it made me not want to. And I just felt like, okay, I can't dance. I shouldn't dance. And then with the movement class session that we had, and those different things that were unpacked, and kind of using movement as a healing tool, it brought up those things, and I think it was really healing for me. And then ever since, I've been doing more dance workouts at home, and I even with my stepdaughter, she's been showing me different dances that she learns on TikTok, and we've been doing them together, and there's just laughter, and it's so beautiful to connect with her in that way. And I look on these different videos and memories that we're going to have together. So I'm getting emotional about it. But it really, I think it's just kind of hold this here for a minute. But dance is really, it can connect, and movement can connect. And it's a way of expressing connection and love and just healing that I didn't see before reading all these different things and leaning into that uncomfortable feeling. So I think another part that I wanted to look at is sound. So sound is a way of healing. And we talked about this in class and about how there's different vibrations and frequencies. I even made the comment of someone who couldn't hear what that would look like. And in the Heal documentary, they were talking about how this person was given different frequencies to reach a certain level. They wanted to reach 0, where it was I guess maybe homeostasis. Just the word of being really balanced and healed was where they were trying to go to. And in the reading by Goldsby, they were talking about how, with COVID, there's just stress that's within people. And it was mentioning these different alternative techniques to that. And one of them I actually had experience with myself. And this is why I'm kind of a little more open to these different things. When my grandma passed away, I was feeling really lost. And like there was this heaviness and I couldn't shake it and I couldn't get it out of my body. And it was right here, like this just feeling of heavy emptiness is what it felt like. And I felt stuck and I didn't know how to move this. So I looked up, different types of alternative therapy. And I ended up at this Tai Chi healing body studio. I think, I'm blanking, it's Body, Mind, Spirit, I think is the name of it, but it's been a while since I've been there. But I took on these different techniques from them that were really powerful, and they played on the imagination, but also the physical body. And it was like this tapping technique where you had to tap different areas to break up the energy. And then I had a session with the healer there, and she was like tapping and almost hitting and trying to get and explaining to me that my energy was imbalanced and there was a blockage, and that's why I couldn't move through these different feelings. And with her doing it, it just, tears would come out, and I was feeling this healing that was moving through me. And then there was another part where it was a group session, and it was almost this like becoming comfortable with being non-judgmental of yourself and being carefree and almost going back to that childlike space of movement and healing. And it was just jumping, and you had to leap across the room, and there was a group of people just supporting you in this freeing of movement. And then there was another part in this whole weekend, it was called Discovering the Self, and like really going back into that place of who you are. And there was this meditation, there was this tapping on the floor, you were moving your whole body, and it was like, what is this image that's coming to you? What's it saying to you? And I had this visualization of a tree, and how the tree had roots, and it had this like message of wisdom, and I saw it changing and rolling through each season, and the roots were staying grounded, and that was the message that kept coming forward to me. And I was meant to offer that was my life journey, or something had to do with this. So it just, that image has really stayed with me. And then kind of touching on this kind of brings me to that symbolism, and how like when we were looking at the Jungian philosophy and bringing the unconscious conscious, all these different methods seem to be kind of going back to that idea of what's within myself, not only the personal unconscious, but the collective, and what needs to come forward. And, as a therapist, I think really my job is to be able to be curious and figure out what method is going to work the best for my clientele. And I picture things like, maybe leaning into a somatic space. Sorry, that's my puppy's barking at something. I guess it's just he's excited about what we're talking about. Hey! No! Sorry, hold on. Go on. I wanted to go. There's apparently something came and spoke to my dog. I don't know. But anyway, so where was I at? I was talking about there's like things in the reading here with Goldsby, where it was talking about all these different methods, and I've experienced it, and I really think it's important to be open and adaptive and really curious on what works for the client. And then even with going back to that Heal documentary, although for myself, I wouldn't lean a certain way, or maybe that's not something that I would want. It's on them, on how they see these things, and it's their journey, and it's figuring out what ways I can adapt to their meaning or their needs. So, for example, I might think the symbol of a tree means wisdom, or means, that came up for me, but for them, the tree may have a different meaning, or their culture maybe see it differently, or where their background is, or what they've experienced in their life. A tree could be something that's very negative, or that they don't want that symbol around. So I think it's, kind of going into this was, Ambrust, I think is how, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but it's this, Jungian's idea that we all have these collective images that help us give meaning and need to come from our unconscious to being conscious, and that's how we make sense of things and our purpose, and that's our goal, is to make unconscious and conscious. But she talks about it was the purple, I think it's Purple Woman, but I'm trying to, where did that name go, but Purple Mother, I think. And so it's, how purple for that culture, it means, it has a certain richness to it because of the fruit that they ate. And how, within her writing, she talks about how, Jungian was very, there's this argument that there could be prejudice or racism or things like that kind of come from this idea that came from Jung, because of his viewpoint on where he was seeing these symbol patterns, and not looking at it as more of a all source of meaning type thing from where he was at. So it was really interesting kind of looking at that, because I could see that as well. If you're going in, for example, the color black meaning darkness or evil, or this collective symbol of, that meaning, kind of call it, someone with a, that is of a what I'm trying to say. I'm like, my brain just it's probably all the reunion and things that happened this week, but someone that is of a black skin tone, right? Like someone that is that or has that culture, them hearing that or seeing that association with the negativity of that meaning could be really harmful or traumatic, kind of leaning into that symbolism. So I think it's really important to hold space for that and recognize that privilege. And then also kind of the same thing in that Healed documentary. It was there was so much privilege that I saw in there from people that, oh, well, I'm just going to go on this journey and I'm going to, hire this really expensive healer to help me. And I think that's another thing that they don't think about, because when I was going to that Body Brain studio, it was like, oh, this is $1,000. Oh, this is $1,200. Oh, this is, your insurance doesn't cover here, but this is really going to be good for you. And it's this push on capitalizing these healing methods in a way, and how not only does our insurance, at least with our actual Western medicine, it's very limited on its coverage, but that itself is also not accessible to a lot of people. So I think that's really important to be aware of those things. And then the last piece that I want to touch on before I conclude is this the article by Bacon, and it talks about how kind of going back into imagination and just connections, and then focusing, things like that. So it's really kind of how I want to explain this, but it's just trying to find the passage that I was looking at, but really how our environment, it talks about the 6 process steps, things like that, but really it's how movement can kind of bring up that unconscious, and within leaning into the imagination. And it kind of made me, I was looking at there's so many techniques that we did in class. The one where, you're, you kind of are somatically kind of just focusing on sound, right? The sound healing. And for myself, it brought up, I was looking at my art piece, and it was just kind of these random lines that came out. And I'll talk about this more on my class reflection, but it really just kind of, what is that story? And what is that story telling me? Kind of like really getting into that imagination aspect and the symbolism that comes from that. And then, when I was having the class session on my own, that meditation and like what was coming up for me, and for me was a deer symbol, and like I was following this deer through a forest, and there was when I pictured shovel, I pictured building a sandcastle and a really small like clay shovel that you have in a bucket, and that was how it was still able to get me through a tunnel and going through this forest. And I was seeing my father and my mom and I feeding deer as a really young like childhood memory, when it was one of the more positive memories I have of my father. And it was just kind of, where is that coming from? And when I was looking up the collective symbolism, of a deer, one of the more popular meanings that I was looking into, it was gentleness and kind of flowing with life's changes and things that are coming through, to make sure you're to heal, essentially. And it was just kind of the gentleness aspect, and I'm going to unpack this more when I reflect and do my art piece, but that's where we are right now with that part. But anyway, kind of makes me, so this article is looking at active imagination, focusing, and dream imagery, and that kind of all ties into really everything, and how there's, like I was talking about earlier, how different techniques are going to work well for different people, whether it's Sanctuary, or whether there is this, for them, they really are, they buy into the idea that, there's the spiritual healing or the non-traditional methods of medicine, and other clients may not. My whole mentality that I've come to is that it's not my journey, it's theirs, and I'm just here to offer support, be curious, offer up things that I think they could, after learning their background, that could be helpful. And they may not want that, or they may want something different, and it's their journey. And I trust that they are divinely, they're guided to be where they need to be, and they're going to make the decisions that are going to best suit them. And that really kind of sums up where I was looking to go with all of these. But really, it's just that, the curiosity is still a big thing, and kind of leaning into ones that I feel resistant towards, especially with that, how that journey has looked from when I first started hearing about these alternative forms of healing and how they can help. And, from my past with my grandma, these different things, feeling a little bit more curious and open, and slowly leaning into that, and keeping that mentality in that way when I'm working with clients, or and I think that's the main takeaway.